Ecclesiastes chapter 5 deals with this subject. Solomon has drawn conclusions about life. Life under the sun, and we remember that phrase, under the S-U-N. He's looking at things from a worldly, secular perspective. And he's doing this because he looks around and he sees a lot of things that are going on, but he also has some personal experience. That's chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 2, verse 26. And again, his personal observations, chapter 3, verse 1 through what will be chapter 6 and verse 12. So in chapter 5, Solomon takes us to the house of God in search of the true meaning of life. And again, essentially, he's in the search for happiness. He's trying to find out what will make us happy. So in order not to be deceived by the vanities of life, we must make an effort to keep our communion with God. I think that's pretty well straightforward understanding. But what do you do when you go to the house of God, as Solomon is going to do with us here, and you find out that the vanities of life have infected the church or infected the religion? The vanities too often found in one's religious life deprive the individual of spiritual authority and protection against other vanities, and destroys the happiness that we actually seek in the first place, because it diverts the happiness that we seek, the true happiness, which is a communion with God, to a communion with worldly things, secular things, which in no way can bring us happiness. Now, what Solomon does, he starts off, first of all, with looking at us as individuals, human beings as individuals, and how they can keep the vanities of life outside, the vanities of a religious life apart from us, how we can avoid them. But then he goes into a couple of things that really strike to the heart of what destroys churches, which was destroying Judaism in his time, and many of the people didn't understand it, didn't even see it. So we can take the vanity out of our religious life by a few things, and that's what he's talking about. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 1, the very first part of that, he says, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Guard your steps. In other words, watch what you're doing. Be careful with what you're doing when you go to the house of God. And number one, I guess the biggest thing would make sure that the reason that you're going to the house of God is the right reason. You know, you go to the house of God to worship God, not for any other reason. Now some people, I know some people that go to the house of their God. They go there because of the fellowship that they find. And they will readily admit that what's going on in their building, in their worship, is wrong. It's not right according to the Bible, but yet that's where their friends are, and that's where they've gone for 40 and 50 years, and they're just not going to change. So there's a little bit of vanity in that. And it's very tough, I think, for us, and I hope it's tough for us to understand that from that perspective, because, you know, we've got to keep that under control also. We've got to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the right reason. So we should give thought to what we will do. And that's what I say, you know, no disrespect to song leaders. But when the song leader says, we're going to sing this song to prepare our minds for the Lord's Supper, if that's when we're starting to prepare our minds for the Lord's Supper, we're way too late, aren't we? It should have been all week. We've been in preparation. We know what we're going to do. We come together, you know, not just for the Lord's Supper, but especially for the Lord's Supper, because that's where we set that communion with Him. and we partake of the sacrifice that he made on the altar of the cross, the body and the blood of Christ. It's there. And that's something that should compel us all through the week to live a life of holiness, that set apartness that God desires from us. Look what Solomon says in verses 2 and 3, chapter 5. Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes with much business, and a fool's voice with many words. Now, why would Solomon talk about things like that? Well, the first area where we get off in is wanting to do our own will rather than God's will. Not to submit to him, but impose our will on God's will. And sometimes we'll even read the scriptures and we'll look for that passage that justifies what we believe, and we'll miss the 100 of passages that put it in proper context and actually drive us away, drive away from the meaning that we want. Let your words be few. Dreams. For a dream comes with much business. I got a dream of what I want the church to be, and I got to do this. If you've ever known manipulators in the church, you know how destructive they can be. And you see them all over the place. A fool's voice with many words. Yeah, people talk a good fight sometimes. But there's no action, no true action to it. And especially when it comes to driving people away from God. What we want is to listen to God, find out what God wants, give him what he wants. But the biggest part of, do not be rash with your mouth. Don't make a vow that you don't intend to keep. If you don't intend to keep it, don't make it. Don't break it, see? Now, I've talked before about vows. You make a vow, and then you find out that vow is going to hurt somebody else. The best thing you can do is say, hey, I was wrong, that vow's gone. But if we make a vow, and that vow hurts ourselves, then we better go ahead and go through with the vow. I think one of the great things, when we make a vow, I'm going to be at every service of the Lord's church, and then we find out that the Cowboys game is right at time for worship services, and no, I got a headache, or whatever, I got to stay home. Never happens, though, does it? Nothing like that ever happens. Well, we should be careful what we will do also. Not only give thought to what we will do, be careful what we will do. Because what's the old phrase? Fools rush in where devils fear to tread, or dare to tread. We've got to be careful. We make plans, and we're going to go, and we're going to do this, and all of a sudden, this sounds good. How many times I've heard it in congregations. Well, this sounds like a good idea. I once tried out at a congregation, and one of the elders told me that the preacher that had been there before me, he would go all over the country to seminars and workshops and anything that he'd find, whatever was going on, he'd bring it back, and boy, they would try it. But they never really sat down to see if it was any good. They were constantly trying new and different things. They'd never get into a pattern. And see, that's not what God wants us to do. Paul said that all things should be done decently and in order. But again, we've got to listen to what God wants from us, and then give him what he wants. Verses 4 and 5, when you vow a vow to God, do not delay in paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. So here, you've got this idea, hey, I'm going to worship God, I'm going to do that. Hey, do it. I purpose this much for the church this week. Hey, do it, The purpose, think ahead of time, and then be careful of what you do. And sometimes be careful that you don't allow excuses from the world to step in there, because that produces a vanity, an emptiness, a vacuum, where the devil loves to get in the vacuum. I think that's a big problem with our country today. There's this huge vacuum out there because our leaders have not been teaching us proper morals and proper ethics, and have not been setting examples, and nobody knows. So it's like back in Israel, there was no king in Israel. Everybody did what was right in their own sight. Now understand, that can be good if everybody's going in a moral direction and the king's going the wrong way. But the king should be moral. The leader should be moral. So Solomon says here, another way to, number one, be careful. Number two, draw near to listen. Ecclesiastes 5:1b, the second part of that. Draw near to listen. So our attitude should be that of someone who wants to come and hear what God has to say. Now, I don't put myself on a pedestal. You all put this up here. I just stand on it so you can hear me. And I try to deliver a message from God. I try to make it understandable. Like Ezra did, take the word and make it explainable, give a lesson. And, by no means am I the authority. You got to check it out. See, our attitude should be like Samuel. Remember Samuel when he was a little boy? The Lord called him at night. Samuel. He runs to Eli. Eli, what did you want? Eli says, I didn't call you. And he goes back, and the same thing happens, and he comes again to Eli. Eli, what do you want? Eli then knows what's happening. He says, next time that happens, you say, Lord, speak, Lord, for your servant hears. And that's what Samuel did. Speak, Lord, for your servant hears. The Bereans, in Acts chapter 17, verse 11, they heard what the Apostle Paul said. Now, a lot of things that he said were new to them, but they were Jews who had the Scriptures. And what Paul would do would be argue from the Old Testament Scriptures that Jesus is the Christ. And they would go and daily check the Scriptures to see if what he was saying was right, because they wanted to know what God was saying. In many churches, worship and Bible study is nothing but show and tell. I've sat through sermons that I probably shouldn't have sat through, where men would get up and they'd tell about their lives, and they'd tell about what they did. And one guy talked about how many times he had died, how many accidents he had, but he was still alive, and there was absolutely no food for thought. One man, I didn't actually sit in this sermon, sit in for this sermon. Somebody told me about it. Another man was teaching, it was a Bible class, and he said, we're going to talk about death. We're going to talk about death. And what he did, he just brought the Dallas Daily News and read the obituaries. There was nothing. There was no food there. There was nothing for people to grasp. It was show and tell. We don't want to be that. We want a communication from God to God's children. And then we can pray back to Him, and we can even ask Him questions. If we ask Him questions every now and then, He'll send the answer in the form that we would never expect through His providence. So we've got to be listening. There's nothing that disturbs me more than, say, in a Bible class, when someone in the auditorium asks a question, and you start to answer the question, you look at them, and they're talking to the person next to them, they're not even paying attention to what the answer is. And there are many times that I've just shut down the next question. I don't even approach them because they're not interested. And if they're not interested in asking the questions, probably not anybody else there interested in. Number 3, do not offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know what they are doing. or do not know that they are doing evil. That's the third part there in verse 1. Don't offer the sacrifice of fools. What in the world would be the sacrifice of fools? That's where you don't know what's going to be going on down there, so you don't even know where to watch your steps. Now you think about this in John chapter 4, Jesus is talking about the woman at the well in Samaria. Okay? And he tells her, or she says, you say that you worship in Jerusalem at the temple, and our leaders say we worship at Gerizim. Read your bulletin article that you have in there today. Who knows what's right? And Jesus looks at her and says, we worship what we know. You worship what you don't even know. So how can you be right if you don't know what you're doing, why you're doing it? How many people do you know that you sit down and you have a religious discussion with them? Why do you do this particular thing down at your church, at your worship service? I don't know. They don't know. They just follow along like blind, blind sheep. Sheep will follow, but like they're blind, they're deaf and they're dumb. They don't care because they're not interested in doing what God says to do. Now Jesus told this woman in verse 24, John chapter 4, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. And I like that article that was in there. Not spirit or truth, both spirit and truth. You got to have the right attitude, doing the right thing. Isn't that exactly what Solomon was saying? Be careful what you do. Okay? Be careful how you do it. In Matthew chapter 15, verses 8 and 9, Jesus said, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. They've heard it from men so much that they think it comes from the Bible. They really do. Oh, no, that has to be the Bible. My pastor would tell me. My reverend went to theological seminary, spent 4 years there. Well, it takes about 3 years to get him totally confused. Okay? Then once they're totally confused, that last year, they're just set into it. But their heart is far from me, is what he says. Our hearts have to be with God. Our hearts, there's a song that talks about two hearts that beat as one. Our hearts need to beat in synchronism. Is that what that is? Or at least in harmony with God's heart. That's kind of that homologia, that confession aspect of it. Now Jesus says something else, chapter 7, verse 21 through 23, and this goes directly to that part of vanity in religious life. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, what day is that? Well, that's the day of judgment, isn't it? Many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name? And then will I declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. They thought they were doing great things for the Lord. And they weren't. Even if they were doing these things, even if they were prophesying and casting out demons and doing mighty works in his name, if they weren't obeying him from a pure heart, it was worthless, because it was their own works and not his works of righteousness. So what's this tell us? Proper worship begins with a fear of God. What does that mean? You need to be afraid not to do what God says. Well, why? Well, what happens when we start down the slippery slope? Well, look at verse 7. For when dreams increase and words grow many, there is vanity. But God is the one who must fear. When people start bragging to you what they've done, telling you how important they are to the church, And especially if they tell you what they've done in the past. Because it makes no difference what they've done in the past. It doesn't make a difference about the bad we've done in the past, right? That doesn't make any difference. Well, the good we've done in the past doesn't make any difference either. What are we doing right now? Did we come here tonight with the proper attitude and with the proper care of what we're doing and how we're going to approach our God in worship? To approach Him with the deepest respect and reverence, we must worship Him as He directs, not as we might wish. And a lot of people do that. Yeah, it's how I wish. Oh, I want to do it this way. My talents. I don't know. It was years ago. I think it was Time Magazine. It may have been Sports Illustrated, because I was more in Sports Illustrated as a teenager than it was Time Magazine. But I think it was Time Magazine, and it had one of those little sections, a church in New Orleans that had a stripper come in. You know, and she stripped for their worship service because that was her talent, and you got to let her show her talent, that her God-given talent in worship. That's strange. I wonder if I can make it there next. No, I didn't think that. But I wonder what goes on in some people's minds. How does that show respect and reverence for God? If we wish to please God in our worship, we will be, like it says in James 1:19, quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. And slow to anger, that means we have to have a willingness to teach people. Sometimes what we want to do is condemn outright. You know, you just get out of here because we don't want nothing to hear. Excuse me. But what we need to do is be willing to teach. Say no, but then say, and here's why we say no to this or to that. So that's how we can take vanity out of our religious life, following those, just some of those principles there. Now, true fellowship with God comforts us regarding the oppression of the poor. Two things that Solomon's going to talk about, and we've talked about this before, haven't we? We talked about how that you look at how oppression or injustice hurts, or I can't even think of the title of my sermon last week, but destroys happiness. Injustice in the world destroys our happiness. Injustice when it comes to us kind of destroys our happiness, if that's what we're looking at, is justice in this world. If we're looking at justice in this world, we're not going to find it. 100%. We rejoice when we do find it. We rejoice when the bad guy's caught and he's put in jail, right? We love it when Superman wins. I watched the movie the other night with Jeremy. Superman died at the end of the movie. At least Batman survived. I guess that was good. But we want justice. We want things right. We don't want to see people oppressed and hurt. So true fellowship with God comforts us regarding the oppression of the poor. So what happens when we go to churches who make that their theme rather than the worship of God? I think we see that in many of our churches today. It's not about worshiping God. It's about what we call today social justice. And it started in the 19th century. It started with good things. We need to end slavery. Well, that was a good thing. I think that's a biblical principle to get behind. But look where it's taken us today. Look where the world is going with this social justice track. Verse 8. If you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter, for the high official is watched by a higher. We got governors there watched by other people. We got a president. Yeah, he's being watched too, isn't he? Amen. He's being watched. He's going to be judged one of these days. For the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. So, nobody's going to get away with anything. Maybe here in this world, but we know this world's not the end of it. So again, many churches have abandoned the gospel of Christ for social justice. Oppression and injustice do occur. We've talked about that. Chapter 5, verse 16 talks about it. Chapter 4, verse 1. What we went over, last week? Or the week? Yeah, last week. Solomon says, do not be amazed. Now what's he mean when he says do not be amazed? Don't let that destroy your faith. Because there's injustice in the world and there's oppression of people, don't let that destroy your faith. That's the world. But your faith's not based on this world. And you don't say, well, it's God's fault. If God was a good God, He'd stop that. Yeah, God could stop it, but think what it would mean. The end of this world. Now, He's going to one day. But right now, He's giving everybody an opportunity to repent and turn to Him. Don't let it destroy your faith. Even high officials answer to someone else. Romans 13:1, there's the governor talks about, you be subject to the higher powers. Why? Because God has instituted that. God has instituted civil government. Okay? No matter where you stand on it, whether you believe you can be a part of it, whether you don't believe you can be a part of it, it's there because God says it needs to be there because of the world that we live in. Okay? And often the oppressors are brought to justice in this life. We see it every now and then. But if not, they're going to be on Judgment Day, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10. But here, listen to this. Even the prophet taken in oppression usually comes back to all. Verse 9. But this is gain for the land in every way, a king committed to cultivated fields. So a king comes in like Solomon, who really taxed the people greatly to build all that stuff that he talked about. And then Rehoboam, he says, what was it? Solomon's little finger is going to be like my waist. I'm going to do even more, and I'm going to do even worse. But think about the prosperity that even came during Solomon's time because of what he brought into the country and the work that was there. So it wasn't all total doom and gloom, all right? There was oppression, but yet there was cultivated fields. In other words, people were being fed. Nobody was going hungry. Maybe nobody was getting rich, but you weren't starving to death. Listen, it's not about getting rich. Our country shouldn't be about getting rich. It should be about freedom. Okay? If we want to starve to death, we ought to be allowed to starve to death, shouldn't we? I think so. Yeah. But if a person wants to be rich, let them be rich. That's their problem. That comes with, what did Solomon say? Sorrows and every kind of mischief and all. So those who desire to be rich are seldom satisfied. So what do? Most of the time they invest their money in something. Hey, invest it in the oil fields, right? What do? They go in and they explore for oil. They put people to work. That's how it works in the world, isn't it? And with profits, there's not very much profit there. They kind of hold it back if they know they can't make a profit. And sometimes the government holds them back from making a profit so they don't invest it. They just hoard it up, waiting for the time when they can. That's kind of the differences between the approaches in many politicians' mind. But you just think of that. Even a king who would enslave another nation must provide for an army. He's got to feed that army. He's got to provision that army. He's got to give them the weapons. Right? It's a strange thing what Solomon was trying to tell us. The main thing, don't be amazed. Don't let that destroy your faith in God. And with some people it does, because what do they want to do? They want to change the church from a soul-saving institution to a social justice institution. The second thing he talks about is materialism in the form of riches, and that can affect our communion with God. Because many churches today are simply in the business of religion. They're not there for worship of God. They're not there to save souls and preach the gospel. They're in it for business. It is a business. And they treat it like a business. The bottom line, are we making a profit? Can we afford for our preacher to have a $30 million home in the suburbs of Houston? You know, that's what it's about for them. When materialism infects a congregation, true fellowship with God teaches us the proper regard for riches. Not that greed that you see coming to where they change the gospel to get more money and more power. Trusting in riches is vanity because they're unable to truly satisfy. That's what verses 10 through 12 tells us. Riches don't satisfy because you never have enough riches. And they're obsessed with riches. Those obsessed with riches are hurt by them. Verses 13 through 17. Think about the trouble people get into because they do crazy things for money. Through misfortune or death, one eventually loses his riches, and all too often the abundance of the rich provides too much turmoil for restful sleep. Oh, I got so much I can't sleep. You know, I know Donald Trump is up at 3 o'clock in the morning with his Twitter account. That's his practice, isn't it? Because that's how much in business he is. That's how much he's invested in. He can't even get a good night's sleep. That's what I would call a good night's sleep. A laboring man enjoys sweet sleep. He enjoys it. He finds rest and enjoyment. What value then are riches? If in acquiring them one must endure much sorrow, sickness, and anger. Look what Paul told Timothy, 1 Timothy 6, 9, and 10, that those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Not just the person doing it, but other people. It takes so many people with them. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. Yeah, used to they walk away from the faith. What do they do with it now? They change the church. They change worship. They change the function of the body of Christ. Well, they can't really do that, but they try their very best to do it in a material way. So concerning riches, Solomon writes, it is good to enjoy the good of one's labor, verse 18. And in verse 19, it is God who gives one the power to truly enjoy what we have. What we have, not what we don't have, not what we desire, but what we have as a blessing that comes from God. Verse 20, for he will not much remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. Well, who's that? Well, that goes back to the one who enjoys what he has and doesn't worry about what he doesn't have. He's able to sleep at peace at night. He feeds his family. He clothes his family. He's got life. And he's got family. And he's got friends. And he's got community. And he's got God. For he will not much remember the days of his life. What does that mean? He doesn't remember the toil. Bobby could probably tell us. It's often compared to women in labor. They go through all that terrible labor, and as soon as the child's born, it's like, oh, boy, look at that baby, look at this time. You know, the pain and anguish, the labor, it was worth it for that final result. And that's, I think, what Solomon is saying about when we work and provide for our families, that when we sit down with them and we see them fed and clothed and housed properly, we've got a joy that's beyond the labor that we've put out for them. So I believe Solomon's trying to tell us that in spite of all the bad things that can happen to us in life and all the worldly temptations that look so pleasant in this life, nothing can be more joyful and fulfilling than a life lived in communion with God. Daily communion. Thank you for your time. The lesson is yours. If you've got a request, a response, anything, let that be made known. If you would, as